first recorded time that Jesus said that he forgave someone of their sins. So now we're in spring AD 30 is about the time frame that was. This is the first year of Jesus' ministry. So now we're going to go, the next one will be when Levi was called, or Matthew was called. We're going to go over that this morning. So we'll be in Mark chapter 2 is where we'll be at this morning. Brother Jerry Green, if you take us back to the Lord in prayer before we start. Amen. So we'll be in Mark chapter 2 is where we're going to be starting out at. Start reading in verse 13. Verse 13 says, "And when he went forth again by the seaside, and all the multitude resorted unto him, and he taught them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the receipt of custom, and said unto him, Follow me. And he arose and followed him. And it came to pass that as Jesus sat at meat in his house, many publicans and sinners sat also together with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many, and they followed him. And when the scribes and Pharisees saw him eat with publicans and sinners, they said unto his disciples, How is it that he eateth and drinketh with publicans and sinners? When Jesus heard it, he said unto them, They that are whole have no need of physician, but they that are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And the disciples of John and of the Pharisees used to fast, and they come and say to him, Why do the disciples of John and Pharisees fast, but thy disciples fast not? And Jesus said unto them, Can the children of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast in those days. No man also seweth a piece of new cloth on an old garment, else the new piece that filled it up taketh away from the old, and the rent is made worse. And no man putteth new wine into old bottles, else the new wine doth burst the bottles, and the wine is spilled, and the bottle will be marred. But new wine must be put in new bottles. Okay, so we see here that this is where he's called Matthew to be a disciple. Matthew was sitting at the receipt of customs. He was sitting at the tax office. It was a roadside booth used to levy taxes on goods being taken to market. Other taxes levied by the Romans was a head tax that was a lot of times taken by soldiers or publicans. And we see here that he ate dinner with the publicans. A publican is a public contractor or a Jew who had betrayed the Jewish people and was working for Rome. See, this is the society we're talking about they were living in. The Jews hated Rome because of the oppression of Rome. But there were some, they called these Jews Republicans because they become a public contractor or a Jew who worked for Rome, often in gathering supplies for the Roman Empire, collecting port taxes, or they oversaw public projects. But see, the publicans and the Levites, both of them, they weren't paid by Rome. So the way they made their money is when they collected taxes, they collected too much and they kept a little bit for themselves. So the Jewish people saw them as crooked, and they didn't even understand why Jesus could call someone like Matthew, could call somebody that was that crooked to be one of his disciples. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 17. And we'll show you how Jesus could even look at Matthew and call Matthew here. And in verse 7, I'm sorry, I said 17, didn't I? It's 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 7. It says, But the Lord said to Samuel, Look not on his countenance on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For the man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Jesus didn't see Matthew as a crooked tax collector, and it's the same way when Jesus looks at any of us. He don't see us as the sinner that we are, but he sees us as what we can be once we're saved and how he can use us. So he didn't even, I don't even think it even crossed Jesus' mind how crooked a tax collector that Matthew probably was. What crossed Jesus' mind was, I can use him, I can save him, and I can make something out of him. And see, because if Jesus saw us as the sinners we are, he would never be able to use any of us if he saw us as really as the sinners and as the awful human beings that we are. There's no way God could use us if he saw us as our heart truly is, because the heart of man is so wicked, he can never use us. But Jesus looks past all that. He looks past that, and he sees you as what you can be. And that's what he saw with Matthew. He saw Matthew as what he could be, not as what he was. So we see that he called Matthew there, and I think Jesus called Matthew to. It's another way Jesus is showing that he's not in it for the people that think they're perfect. As a tax collector, everybody knew. It wasn't no hidden fact that Matthew was crooked and that he cheated. It's how he got his riches and his wealth, and how he had the money to throw Jesus a big dinner party after he came by and stuff. He did all. Matthew knew that, and nobody had to tell him that. That's the way the world is. A lot of times, religion wants to go out and tell people how bad they are. And we don't have to tell people in this world. People that are living in this world, they know where they're at. They want to see something different that's going to bring them out of that. If you browbeat somebody over where they're at in life, you're not going to help them a bit. You got to tell them what they can be through Jesus Christ and how Jesus can lift them up and bring them out of that. If you tell a drunk, if you just run a man down and say you're a drunk and that's all you are, he knows that. You don't have to tell him that. Everybody knows what problems they got in their life. What they're looking for is a way and a person in Jesus that can bring them out of it. They want you to show them what they don't know, and what they don't know is how Jesus can change their life. And see, that's where our testimony becomes so relevant. Whatever you were before Jesus saved you, all of a sudden you can say, hey, this is what I was before Jesus saved me. Or if they know you, they know your past life, this is what Jesus brought me out of. See, that's how you win people, is showing them what Jesus brought you out of and how Jesus has changed you. Because that's what people's looking for. People's not looking for to be run down where they're at. They're looking for somebody that can lift them up. And we know we've got Jesus, and Jesus can lift them up and bring them out of it. And that's what he saw in Matthew. He didn't come to Matthew and say, Matthew, I know you're a crooked, awful tax collector, but if you let me save you, I can save you from it. He just told Matthew, he said, follow me. Because he knew once Matthew got saved that everything else would fall in place, that all that other would be in his past, that it would be gone, and that he would be able to use them because Jesus saw what he could be. Another thing he said there in Mark, I want to go back to. Let me get back over there. In verse 17 there, he said, when Jesus heard it, he said to them, they that are whole have no need of a physician, but they that are sick. I came not to call the righteousness, but sinners to repentance. Okay, let's go to Romans chapter 6. Start reading verse 16. Romans 6 and 16 says, know you not that to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom you obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. But God be thanked that you were servants of sin, but you have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which delivered you. Being then made free from sin, you became the servants of righteousness. I speak after the manner of men because of the infirmity of your flesh. For as ye have yielded your members to the servants of uncleanness unto iniquity, even so now yield your members servants to righteousness unto righteousness. For when you were the servants of sin, you were free from righteousness. So see what Jesus is saying here? He's saying that sometimes we don't even realize how bad we need that position. And that's what he's telling the Pharisees. See, he's coming to a people, he's saying, I'm coming to the people that understand that they need me. That's why he couldn't save a lot of the Pharisees, because they were so religious and so perfect that they couldn't see that they needed Jesus. And that's why a lot of times you'll hear preachers say that the hardest people to ever get saved are good moral people that don't even understand that they need salvation. See, for that old drunk, it's easy for him to understand he needs something different in his life. But a lot of times there's people in this world that they think are so good that they don't even need it. And see, it's just like a doctor, a real doctor. If you've got something going on in your life, if you're having a pain or a problem, the doctor can't treat it if you don't go to him. If you don't go to him and say, hey, this is what's wrong in my life, and this is what's going on with me, and I need some help with it, the doctor can't treat you unless you'll open up and go to him. And see, that's what he was telling the Pharisees. He's telling the Pharisees that y'all are so religious and y'all so perfect, y'all don't even understand that y'all need me. But here in Romans, he's telling us in Romans, let me find here. It says, I speak after the manner of men because of the infirmity of your flesh. See, we've all got that sickness of the flesh. We all need the doctor. We all need Jesus. We all need that physician. But a lot of times, like I said, we think we're so good. Even as Christians, and we get saved, and we start living a Christian life, and we start getting some things where the devil don't trip us up so easy anymore, and we get some strength in our Christian life, you're going to look back sometime, and you're going to think, well, I'm doing pretty good right now. I don't know that I need. But if you'll look, you still carry that infirmity. You still carry that sickness we call the flesh with you, and there's never going to be a time in your life when you're going to get away from the point that you need Jesus. That there's always going to be mess-ups, and there's always going to be sin in your life. There's always, whether it be big sin or little sin. See, that's something I always, y'all hear me hound on. Big sin for me is not a problem. I'm saved. I got away from a lot of things. Big sin for me is not a problem. But it's still sin when God tells me to witness to somebody, or God tells me to do something and I don't do it. That's most of my problem with sin now. It's not that I'm going out on Saturday night and getting drunk and committing sin like that. But there's still other sins that all through your Christian life. For him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, it is sin. If God tells you to do something good, whether it be help somebody or just whatever the good is that he tells you to do, and you don't do it, it's sin to you. And you still, every time you sin, you still need that position. You still need Jesus. So don't ever get to that point in your life that you think you've reached this plateau, that you can do it on your own. Because that's what he's telling here. That all in Romans, he said everybody's got that infirmity. As long as we've got this flesh, we've got that ability to fail Jesus, and we've got the ability to do things that you wouldn't even imagine. I've seen people be in church and be so close to the Lord, and get out of church, and 5 years later, the life they're living and the things you're doing, you never could imagine that they would live like that. But when you walk away from that position, and you don't have Jesus in your life to help you anymore, he can take you a lot further than you ever thought you could go when you step away from him. So that's what I want you to get is always remember that no matter where you are in your Christian life or how you think that you're getting to a point that this don't bother you no more, there's going to be something else come up in your life that the devil's going to throw in your life. He's not going to let you go and not put something in your life. There's always going to be. So we all, from sinners to saved people, all the way through, everybody in this world has the exact same need for Jesus. Just because you're saved don't mean you've got less of a need for Jesus. You've still got a need for him in your daily life, just like everybody else does. Let's go back to our scripture where we was at in Mark chapter 2. Okay, down here in verse 22, he says, And no man putteth new wine into old bottles, else the new wine doth burst bottles, and the wine is spilled, and the bottles will be marred, but the new wine must be put into new bottles. Okay, here in verse 22, after they discuss fasting, and the old tradition of the Jews and the Pharisees that we see here, they fasted twice a week. You remember when the Pharisee was praying in the temple, he said, I fast twice a week, and I give tithes of everything that I have. They fasted twice a week. But Jesus is telling him that your old traditions will not necessarily be part of the new plan of salvation. Because what he's talking about here with the old wine, the new wine in old bottles is, he's saying that old traditions, everything that you held people to before, can't hold up in the new term of salvation and grace and mercy. So he's saying old traditions can't hold up. Because he's saying, and he's talking to him here, but when he talks to him about fasting, he says, how can my disciples fast when I'm with them? They don't have anything, no reason to fast when I'm with them. He said, there'll come a time when I'm not with them that fasting and prayer will come back to the disciples. But I don't even think when Jesus was there, they didn't have to pray. They didn't have to get off. Like Jesus got off and prayed to God. We don't see the disciples ever getting off and separating themselves in prayer and everything. They spoke to Jesus. They was with him. They had no need for prayer. They could turn around and talk to him. And see, that's what he's telling me. He said, the time will come when all this stuff will come back. Fasting and prayer will come back. But right now, you don't understand. They don't have to fast because I'm with them. They don't have to pray because they just talk to me face to face right now. And that's what he's telling them here. But I read a couple of different commentaries on the new wine in the old bottles. It says, Your old traditions will not be part of the new. Old rituals are not necessary to salvation and cannot contain it, because salvation is based on grace and mercy, not religious rules. Another commentary also says that it shows a reason Jesus called the unlearned, that he called the disciples like Peter and James and John and Matthew. He called non-religious people to be his disciples in religious ways. Disciples. It's easier sometimes for salvation and grace and the newness of salvation and grace that was coming upon them to be taught to people that don't already have a religious background. And sometimes it's easier to get people saved than it is to get Christians to change. And that's what he's telling here. Sometimes it's going to be easier for me to get somebody to understand salvation that don't know anything about religion than it is to get a person that's already set in their ways and has their own traditions to change. See, he's talking about new wine and old bottles. He's talking about it breaking the bottle. Some people get so set in their ways and in tradition that when something new comes in, not even whether it's biblical or not, just a change in their tradition will physically break some people and mentally break some people. They cannot change. And that's what he's talking about, new wine here in old bottles. If you put salvation and grace into some of these Pharisees that had fought for the law and believed the law for so long, mentally you're going to destroy them. They cannot handle it. They can't handle. Some people cannot handle change, and that's what he's talking about here with the new wine and old bottles. Whether it's biblical change or whether it's just a dropping of a tradition or stuff, sometimes you will break people when you change. Every time. Me and Liz was talking about on the way to church this morning. We was talking about different pastors we've had here, and I can remember every time we've had a pastor change, you lose some people, and you lose some people because they just straight up can't handle the change. Nothing else, no other reason. Nothing negative against them or negative against the church. The church, I don't know when we've had a new pastor that I felt this church went in a wrong direction, but every time a pastor's changed in my life, we've lost people just because. When Brother Dennis came here, a bunch of people left because they said he's legalistic, he's too hard, and y'all ain't going to sit under him. We can't handle change, and that's what happens a lot of times. They get so set in their ways that change will either physically or mentally, that it will destroy them. So sometimes he's saying here with these disciples, he says it's hard for people when you change the way. It's in Mark and Luke too, just like all these are. As he saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. But he said unto them, Have you not read what David did when he was hungered, and they that were with him? He entered into the house of God, and did eat the shewbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them that were with him, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you, that in this place is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what it meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath day. Okay, so we got to understand where we're at in this controversy. Here in verse 20, he's talking about a couple examples he gave them. He gave not in verse 5. I'm sorry. It says, Or have you read in the law how on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are yet blameless? Okay, he's talking about Jewish tradition of the Sabbath day. And Jewish tradition of the Sabbath day is the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. But the Jews, just like they did, the Pharisees did and everything, they had taken the Sabbath day and keeping it holy, they had taken it way out of context. They had went way past that. They went way past that. And let's go to Luke. I'm going to read this in Luke, the same one. It's Luke chapter 6. Before I do that, I got a little commentary here I wanted to read. That's right. I wanted to do it in a little different order than what I'm started off to do here. To talk about the Jewish Sabbath, a large body of teaching regarding the interpretation of the Sabbath thus began to emerge before and right after the coming of Christ. These interpretations were first preserved and passed on as oral traditions, and then later put into writing in the 3rd century A.D. A written compilation of the oral traditions of the scribes was completed, which was known as the Mishnah. It contained 63 tractates on various subjects of the law, requiring about 800 pages in English. So see, this is what they had took the Ten Commandments and the law and how big the Pharisees had made it. They made it an 800-page book about how to keep the Sabbath. Later, Judaism set itself to the task of interpreting these interpretations. These commentaries on the Mishnah are called the Talmuds. Of the Jerusalem Talmud, there are 12 printed volumes, and of the Babylonian Talmud, there are 60 printed volumes. So right here we've got 18 books that they came up with that contains the law. So this is how big. They took the Ten Commandments and the law that was given in Exodus, and they blew it up into 18 different books of law that you got to keep. The law lays it down that the Sabbath day is to be kept holy, and that on it no work is to be done. That is a great principle. But the Jewish legalists and the Pharisees had a passion for definition. So they asked, what is work? All kinds of things were classified as work. For instance, to carry a burden was considered work on the Sabbath day. But next, if you're going to keep defining things, and they're going to say to carry a burden is work, then you got to define what a burden is. Well, a burden to them became food that is equal to the weight of a dried fig. You couldn't carry it on the Sabbath. Enough wine for mixing in a goblet, you couldn't carry on the Sabbath. Milk enough for one to swallow couldn't be carried on the Sabbath. Honey enough to put upon a wound. Oil enough to anoint a small member. Water enough to moisten the eyes. Paper enough to write a customs house notice on. Ink enough to write 2 letters of the alphabet. Reed enough to make a pen. And so on endlessly. So that they spent endless hours arguing whether a man could or could not lift a lamp from one place to another on the Sabbath. Whether a tailor committed a sin if he went outside with a needle stuck in his robe. Whether a woman might wear a brooch or false hair. Even if a man might go out on the Sabbath with artificial teeth in his mouth or an artificial limb. If a man might lift his child up on the Sabbath. These things to them were the essence of their religion. The religion was legalism and petty rules. We can hardly be surprised to find a head-on collision between the scribes and the Pharisees and our Lord over the issue of the Sabbath. The gospel writers record numerous occasions when the Jewish religious leaders clashed with Jesus over the interpretation of the Sabbath. Almost always this resulted from an incident in which the Lord violated the Sabbath according to the legalistic teaching and interpretations of the scribes and Pharisees. Such incidents are helpful to us in our study of the Sabbath, for they allow us to see some of the ways in which the Bible's been wrongly interpreted over history, as well as the true interpretation of the Sabbath given by our Lord. Let us learn from the errors of the Jewish religious leaders, and especially from the divine interpretation of the Sabbath by your Lord. Our method is to consider a few Sabbath texts in the Gospels and to attempt to learn how the legalistic interpretation of the scribes and Pharisees is in error. Contrast the wrong interpretation with the correct interpretation of our Lord. I don't need to read the rest of that. But see how legalistic the Pharisees have become? They have 18 books on the law, and that's what they're telling Jesus here. Because they picked some grain and ate that Jesus is wrong. But all it is religion is built. What I want you to get out of all this and understand is that religion, the only purpose for religion is to make man look good. See, if you create a religion with all these rules, a man can step out and say, I did this, I done that, I've kept all these rules, I'm better than you are. That's all religion is for. See, salvation puts us all on a level playing field, but religion wants to put people in different levels. And Jesus never did that. I was thinking this morning about the crowns that we can get as Christians, the rewards we can get. You know, even the pastor's crown, if you back and support and help your pastor, you can have a pastor's crown. There's no difference in what you can get and a pastor can get. Even if we look at a pastor as one of the highest places in our church, right? But he cannot, there's nothing in the salvation of Christ that he can have that you can't have. Jesus didn't separate anybody and make anybody better than the other one. Anything he can have, you can have. Even in judgment. I've heard a lot of people say the pastor be judged. The pastor will have a judgment for every word he spoke in the pulpit and all that stuff. But do you not think that as a man I'll be judged for every word I spoke leaving my house? That's the same judgment as a pastor's judgment. Do you not think as a Christian you'll be judged for every word you spoke to the lost world? Yeah, we're all going to have the same judgment. Everything is leveled at the cross, and that's what religion does. Religion separates people into, but when you give a list of rules, like religion did with the Pharisees, then a man can say, I'm higher than you are because of this, or I'm higher than you are because of that. But that's what Jesus wiped out. Jesus wiped all that out, and he made everybody equal at the foot of the cross. So, let's see. We read Luke, so I need to read my commentary on Luke. Let's go back and read the latter part of Luke there. We read, let's read Luke chapter 6, verse 6 through 11. It says, And it came to pass also on another Sabbath that he entered into the synagogue and taught, and there was a man whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and Pharisees watched him whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might find accusation against him. See, religious people, they're not worried about the man with the withered hand. They cared less about him. They could not care less about that man. The whole purpose that he was there was that they could accuse somebody else and make somebody else look lower than they are, because they don't keep the rules we are. See, that's what religious people do. They don't care about people. They care about making themselves look good. And that's what the Pharisees were doing here. And verse 8 says, But he knew their thoughts, and he said to the man which had the withered hand, Rise up and stand forth in the midst. And he rose and stood forth. Then said Jesus unto them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath day to do good or to do evil, to save life or destroy it? And looking round about upon them all, he said unto the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he did so, and the hand was restored whole as the other. And they were filled with madness, and communed one to another what they might do to Jesus. See, the religious people already, they're wanting to kill Jesus for doing good. And that's the way the religious people are going to be today in your life. When you're trying to get people saved for nothing but salvation, and you're not trying to build an organization that's going to lift people up, some religious people, they're not going to have it just because they can't have their higher seat in those kind of places. When I stand up here and say salvation makes everybody equal, believe it or not, there are some religious people that makes mad because they want to think they're on a different level. They want to think they're so good they're on a different plane. And it makes some religious people mad because they can't accept that the drunk that gets saved today is just as good in God's eyes as the man that's been a Christian for 30 years. There's no difference in them. The young Christian that's still got several sins in their life and they don't even know half of what they're doing is wrong, on Jesus' eyes, they're just as saved as a man that's been saved for 30 years. You're still on the same level. There's different levels in ministry, but in Jesus' eyes in salvation, there's not different levels of salvation. You don't serve him for so many years and get to a point that you're a better Christian than everybody else. That's what he's that's what he's telling them here. And he keeps telling them this. In Luke here, it says their purpose was to test him. Some raised the question as to whether or not it was permissible for a disabled man to even be in the synagogue, because they wouldn't let a disabled man into the temple. We're not sure about the synagogue tradition. Perhaps this man was even planted by the Pharisees as a trap for Jesus. It says they were watching to see if he was going to heal him. They're trying to find something with which they can accuse him. This shows us two things. This demonstrates that Pharisees and religious people lack of concern for the sick man. They knew Jesus could heal people, but they were more concerned with getting rid of Jesus than they were concerned for the welfare of the sick man. See, that's what it is. When our church becomes more about people being lifted up than it is about the healing of the sick man, the healing of the sinner. See, that's all church is about. Church is about seeing sinners saved. It's not about coming into an organization where you can say, I've done this and I've done that, and I've got rank in this church and things like that. Church is not about that. I'm a deacon here. I think a deacon's an office right under the pastor, but it don't make me any different from anybody here. I have a little more work, a little difference on decisions and things, but as a whole, it doesn't make me any different than anybody here. When it comes right down to it, in this church, every member has a vote, and I don't have a vote that carries any more weight than anybody else's vote. And that's what Jesus is telling here, that under the cross, under him, everything's going to be equal. We see how religious people, they're not worried about the sin sick people. They're worried about lifting up themselves. It also shows us that they were not in the synagogue to worship God. See, when they come to church, when religious people like that come to church, they're not coming in here to see what God's going to do today and see His Spirit move. They're coming here for you to see them, is what they're coming here for. They're coming here to cause trouble a lot of times. They were not in the synagogue to worship God. We've already, Jesus quoted Hosea 6 to them saying that God desired compassion more than sacrifice. See, in Hosea 6:6, Jesus told them, that's where Jesus told them in the Old Testament, He said, I'd rather have compassion, and I'd rather see that my people love me more than I want to sacrifice. Sacrifice is a rule that was made for them to sacrifice animals, but Jesus said that didn't even matter to Him. It wasn't about the sacrifice, it was about, that's what Jesus is talking about. He wants that personal relationship with you. It's not about a bunch of rules, it's about having a personal relationship with you. Jesus knows if in your heart you love Him or not. And that's what He wants. He wants you in your heart to love Him. Everything else will come if you love Him in your heart. And we know that Jesus knows everything, so He knows if we truly love Him in our heart. And if we get to that point where we truly love Him, and Brother Mike's been on this after, I read it a couple weeks ago, and it says the two biggest commandments is to love your God and to love your neighbor. And if you do those two, see, if we'll get back to the basis of Christian living is, in your heart, your relationship between you and God. Everything else will stem out of that relationship, but it's got to start with that relationship in your heart. Nobody can force a set of rules on a man. That's what Jesus is telling you. He said, y'all tried and tried for all these years to force rules on people, and all you do is make people mad at you when you try to force or shove rules down their throat because their heart's not right, because you didn't teach them first that they needed a heart change. If you teach people they need a heart change and they fall in love with Christ, then a young Christian that truly falls in love with Christ, whatever the pastor tells him he needs to do, he ain't going to think nothing about it. He's going to jump and do it because of his love for Christ and because he sees what Christ done for him, and he's going to want to do anything he can for Christ. Rules are not going to be a problem when the heart change comes. And that's what Jesus is telling them. Y'all have told people all these rules, but you've not told them that they've got to get rid of that sinful heart. And that's what Jesus was telling them here. Let's go to Matthew chapter 12 again. Verse 9 through 14. It says, and when he was departed thence, he went into their synagogue. And behold, there was a man which had his hand withered. And they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days? And that they might accuse him. And he said unto them, what man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will not lay hold on it and lift it out? How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore is it lawful to do well on Sabbath days? Then he saith unto the man, stretch forth thy hand, and he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole like the other. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him on how they might destroy him. So see, this is the same text in a different gospel here. It says in the Matthew passage, he gives us an illustration about a sheep in a pit to show that doing good on the Sabbath is okay. Doing what is right is okay. That is the issue. It also shows us that it is wrong to do nothing when you have the ability to do something. See, they would walk by, if it'd been you or your child in that same pit, and the Pharisees would have walked by and said, it's a Sabbath day. They would have used religion to say, I can't help that person. But that's what Jesus is telling them. He said, it's never wrong to do good. No matter what day it is, he said, I never gave you a law that would keep you from helping another man and doing good. What does Jesus' argument assume? It assumes that people are more important than animals. Jesus indicts them on the issue of the value of people over animals. God prescribed animal sacrifice as substitute for men. By the time of the New Testament was written, there was such a perversion of human value, animals were more valued than people. Is it not true in our society? Say we have spotted owl eggs, but abort millions of babies a year. We stop our cars and we carry a turtle across the road, and then someone else goes and kills someone for a car stereo and a pair of tennis shoes. It's obvious from the Bible which is more valuable, But since our society no longer considers the Bible authority, everything is relative, even though we have no argument with the human rights activists or animal rights activists. See, that's what he's telling them here. He's explaining to them, because that sheep has value and it can be sold for money, you would be more likely to help that sheep than you would another man. Because, see, that's how religion perverts things. See, over time, the religion of our society has gotten to the point that you'll go to jail for killing an animal, but then we can abort millions of babies and nothing's ever thought about it. I often think of the scripture in the Old Testament where it talks about, or it might be in the New Testament, where it talks about there comes a time that they will worship the creation more than the Creator. And I think that's where we've got to in our society a lot of times. We think animals and things, but yet we have no regard for human life as a baby or anything like that. But you'll go to jail. They'll put you in jail quickly if they catch you mistreating an animal. But yet the same thing won't happen when you abort babies. See, that's what Jesus is telling them. He's telling them the worth of human life, the value of human life. He's saying whatever, even if it is the Sabbath, and y'all have made up all these rules, he said it's never wrong to do good, and it's never wrong to help your fellow man. Go to Mark chapter 3. Try to get through this before we run out of time so I can finish up on this scripture. Mark chapter 3, and in verse 1 it says, He entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man which had a withered hand. And they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. And he saith unto the man which had the withered hand, Stand forth. And he saith unto them, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. And when they looked round about, and when he had looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he said unto the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. And the Pharisees went forth straightway, took counsel with Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. Jesus asked them if it's lawful to save life or destroy life on a Sabbath day. What's the irony with the statement? He is trying to save a man's life or help a man, and they're already trying to destroy his. See, he asked them the question. He knew what they were thinking, and don't think for a minute that anything goes by in your life that Jesus don't know what you're thinking. He knew they were ready to kill him already, and he says, y'all talking about keeping the Sabbath, and he basically told them, he said, I'm trying to help a man, and y'all trying to kill a man, and y'all trying to say I'm wrong on the Sabbath, and you're right. And that's the way it is a lot of times in religion. He's trying to save life, they're trying to destroy life, his to be precise. Perhaps that's why they remain silent. He's setting them up because after this they are furious, and they go out and plan his death. His answer to them was, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? They won't answer him, so he takes the initiative and he states that it's okay to do good. He was disappointed, righteously angry over their hard hearts. Although I'm sure he had compassion on the man with the withered hand, the miracle is partly motivated because of his anger against the Pharisees. See, he partially just healed this man just because I'm going to show you it's right to do good on the Sabbath, and y'all are trying to do evil. See, even though they were keeping all these rules, their heart wasn't right. And that's what he keeps showing the Pharisees. You're doing all this stuff that makes you think you're okay with God, but you're not. And it's about heartfelt salvation. It's about true salvation from the heart. And this morning, as we go through the service, check your heart. Is your heart right with God? Is your heart where it needs to be with God? Or do you love him like you should? Do we love him with all our heart? There might even be somebody here this morning who's, when you start checking, you go, I don't even know I've played this religious game. My dad, I don't know, a lot of y'all don't know my dad because he passed away, but I've had people all my life. I can be a little different turn than my dad. I can be hard to get along with stuff, but I don't know that I've ever had anybody ever had a crossword with my dad, everybody just, but my dad come to this point in his life, and it blew me away, but he came to this point where he came to the altar, and he said, I've just always been here. I don't have a time of salvation. And that eated him, and that tore him up, because when I started, after he got saved, and I started checking him, he went back to a lot of the older people in our family, and he said, hey, do you ever remember me getting saved? They're like, no, you've just always been a good person and always been in church. We never remember when you were out of church. We never remember when you were running the roads and drinking and doing a lot of things. We never remember any of that time. You've just always been here. And that's what his words to me was, son. He said, I never could get a hold of that time where I had that change in my heart. Maybe somebody here today has just always been here. And maybe if you've been a good person, you've just always been here. And that's what he told me. He said, I've always been in church, but I can't get a hold of a time and a place that I ever asked the Lord to save me. And he said, when I went to the altar that morning, he said, I felt like I was going to die right there on that altar if I didn't get saved right then. And that's what the Lord put on me. He was a deacon in this church. He walked away from it and sat right here on the pew and never, I don't think he ever looked back on that and ever thought it was anything bad that he gave up his deaconship and gave away. He was a deacon all my life. As long as I can remember, my dad was working in the church. But it come that point in time when it wasn't about rules and keeping rules. It was about having a heartfelt salvation and having that personal relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. So as we go through church this morning, check your relationship with Jesus Christ. Do you have true salvation? Or did you do something to get... See, as a child, I did it several times. I came to the altar and professed salvation, but every time it was to get somebody off my back because I've been caught doing something. And that is not salvation. When you get caught doing something, coming to this altar and letting everybody in the church think you got saved and everything's going to be different when you know it ain't going to be, that's not salvation. Salvation is a relationship in your heart that will change your life forever. You won't be able to walk away from salvation. You might backslide, but you won't walk away from that time that you knew that the Lord saved you and forgave you of your sins. Brother Art, if you dismiss us this morning.